So, have you heard about this new California Consumer Privacy Act law that goes into effect on January 1st, 2020? And are you worried about whether it applies to you and what that means that you need to do in your business? I know, just when you thought you were done with all these privacy laws, thanks to the GDPR, did you catch my training on that one? I know that you were ready to put these away for good. But does the CCPA even apply to online coaches, creatives, and course creators? Well, in today's video, you're going to learn exactly what the California Consumer Privacy Act even is, what it means, and whether it even applies to you, because based on this law, you might not even fall under the definition of who has to comply with it. And that's exactly what you're going to learn here today. If you want to learn legal tips for online business, hit subscribe so you can watch every new episode I put out each Tuesday with bite-sized legal tips. I'm Sam Vander Wielen, an attorney turned entrepreneur who helps coaches, creatives, and online course creators learn how to legally protect and grow their online businesses through my DIY legal templates and Ultimate Bundle program. I have helped thousands of women in the last 3 years navigate these pesky little laws that jump up from time to time, and now it's your turn. So let's jump in. What is the CCPA? It is a law that California passed nearly 2 years ago, but which goes into effect starting January 1st, 2020. I know, that's coming up, or it's already here, depending on when you're watching this video. But it's a California law that will go into effect on the first of the new year that allows California consumers, so this is a law that gives people who live in California the right to ask companies to disclose certain information, personal information, that they've collected about them or maybe even purchased about them. So it really is very similar to a privacy policy, but it gives California privacy what you have to go through and tell people about in a privacy policy. But what it allows California consumers to do is ask a company to disclose what kind of information they've collected, where they've collected that information, like where did you get it from, why did you collect it, what are you using it for. It's kind of the who, what, when, where, how thing of privacy information in California. The bill actually goes into great detail about what companies have to do with that data, what they have to do to consumers and to reply to those requests and disclosures. And it's super detailed and super onerous for certain kinds of companies. But this might not even apply to you, and therefore you don't have to listen to an entire video explaining to you what all of the different complexities are of the CCPA if you're not the kind of company that this law is targeting. So I think the more important question here is, what kind of companies does this law even apply to? And if you don't meet these criteria, you don't really have to worry about it. So let's hop into what kinds of companies the CCPA even applies to. So as I mentioned earlier, the CCPA actually only applies to certain companies. And the CCPA, the law itself, actually defines what they mean by a company and who that term actually applies to. I've actually dropped a link below to the law itself from California's website. If you want to check it out yourself, I'm going to give you a summary here today. Okay, so California gives us 4 main factors that apply to whether or not you are the type of business that would qualify as having to comply with the CCPA. So I'm going to go over all 4 of these factors, and you might get nervous with the first 3 because you're going to be like, I think that the CCPA, if I could ever get this acronym correct, the CCPA might apply to you based on those first 3 factors, but hang in there with me because the 4th one is going to be the one that knocks most of us out. So first and foremost, the very first factor that California gives us about who the CCPA applies to is whether or not you have a registered business entity. So if you've already watched my video that I did on LLCs and what business entities are, if you haven't, I highly recommend going and checking that out first so you get really clear on what a business entity really means and what the different types are. But if you have a registered business entity like a sole proprietorship, LLC, partnership, those are all examples of the type that California gives us as examples of what qualifies as a company. But that's not it. That's just factor 1. Factor 2 is whether your company collects personal information. And if you watched my video on website policies, I went over what personal information really means in America because it's a much lower threshold than you probably think. And really collecting personal information can be as simple as collecting someone's name and email, their birth date, definitely their address or any financial information. So a company who collects personal information does fall under the definition of a company in the CCPA. But remember, you have to have all 4 of these things that I'm going to mention. So you might have the first 2, you might even have the 3rd, but hang in there for the 4th. The third one is that you do business online in California, that you do business in California. The third one is that you do business in California. And remember, this is really important for you. If you do online business, you might be thinking, I'm not in California, I'm in Florida, I'm in Pennsylvania, I'm in Maine. Well, what matters is that you do business in California. And when you do business online, nowadays it's a pretty slippery slope and an easy argument to say that you're probably doing business in California if you have clients there, if you're marketing your business there, right? So if you're on Instagram, if you're on Facebook and you have people in your Facebook community who are in California, if you have people on your email list who you're trying to sell to who are in California, I would just take a very liberal view with factor number 3 and say that you probably do business in California or want to do business in California if you run an online business. But I'm so glad that you hung in there to this point because I'm going to go over factor number 4, and don't worry, this is the one where the CCPA knocks out most of us. Okay, so factor number 4 under the CCPA of who qualifies as a company, which means that you would have to comply with this law. This factor says that you have to have one of the following 3 things I'm about to mention. And I think for 99.9% of you, you won't have any of the following 3 things, which is probably why you would get knocked out and not have to comply with the CCPA, at least as of now. But if you have one of the following 3 factors, then the CCPA does apply to you. So what this law tells us is that if your company does gross annual revenue of $25 million or more per year, then you do qualify as a company. So do you make more than $25 million a year in gross annual revenue? I hope so. That would be awesome. # future goals. That's for sure. But if you aren't quite there yet, don't worry. At least so far you haven't been qualified as having to comply with the CCPA. Step 2 of this factor 4 is whether or not you collect the personal information, you buy or sell or collect the personal information of 50,000 or more subscribers per year, of 50,000 or more consumers per year or devices per year. I have a feeling that you're probably not dealing in that number of subscribers quite yet, but if you are collecting the personal information of 50,000 or more subscribers or consumers per year, then you may fall under the CCPA. The last and final factor under this step is whether you get 50% or more of your revenue from selling consumers' information online. So if you just listen to all 3 of those, if you make $25 million or more in annual gross revenue, collect 50,000 or more consumers' information in 1 year, or make 50% or more of your annual revenue in selling consumers' data, then this doesn't apply to you. So can you see why I said that this factor knocked most of us out, right? So maybe you have a registered business entity, maybe you do business online, maybe you collect people's personal information, but unless you're making over 25 million per year, or you're collecting over 50,000 subscribers, or you're making 50% of your revenue in selling people's information online, then it sounds like the CCPA doesn't apply to you quite yet. And I say yet because this law is new and it could change. I have a feeling that this law came into effect based on what I have read as a response to the data collection issues that we've seen over the past couple of years from big companies, not necessarily companies like ours, but it's definitely something to keep our eyes on. And since we already have to do a lot of this stuff already, thanks to privacy policy laws in the US, the GDPR that I mentioned earlier, we have to do a lot of this stuff already. And so it's just smart to have these things in place. I think probably the biggest thing you want to have in place, especially after watching this video and after watching my website policies video, is a solid privacy policy. And you don't just want any policy. You don't want one of those freebies online or a borrowed copy and pasted one from a friend. You want a legit privacy policy that actually speaks to you and the way that you do business online. That is actually one of the top legal mistakes that I see online, which is why I put it together a free guide for you called the Top Legal Mistakes to Avoid in Online Business, where I share the 6 mistakes I see being made most often online and teach you how to avoid them. So you can grab the link to download your free Top Legal Mistakes to Avoid guide right below in the description. And before you go, please let me know if this video was helpful. And if you have any questions about the CCPA or about privacy policies, please just drop me a comment below, like this video, and make sure before you go, you hit subscribe to see each new video every Tuesday.